So maybe to begin, let's just take a slow look around our environment, just to kind of settle into the room that you're sitting in right now. And maybe taking a moment to notice something that maybe you haven't noticed before, the colors in a painting, for example, or anything else in your room right now. Just bringing your full attention to the environment that you're sitting in. Once you've done that, now let's settle into the position in your chair, making it a comfortable posture and position. Maybe just making sure that both your feet, if that feels comfortable to you, are on the floor, and noticing what it feels like to have your feet in contact with the floor right now. I'm assuming most of you are sitting in a chair, so maybe just take a moment to notice what it feels like right now to be held and supported by the structure of the chair. If it's comfortable for you to do so, you may wish to close your eyes now, bringing your attention a bit more inward. If it doesn't feel appropriate for you to close your eyes for whatever reason, just a soft gaze down in front of you. But just bringing that intention and attention now inward. Noticing perhaps if there's a sense of warmth or coolness in the body. And inviting ease here now. As best you can. Maybe just moving through the body, noticing any tension or holding. And inviting a sense of ease, relaxation into the body. We often unconsciously brace or hold tension without even noticing it. Just becoming mindfully aware of what's ever present without having to judge it, and with some kindness softening into, inviting ease. And then when you're ready, taking in a couple of deep, fuller in-breaths and out-breaths. And as you breathe out, really permitting that out-breath to release all the way out, really focusing maybe a little longer on that out-breath. If it feels good for you, maybe taking a moment to introduce some sound with that out-breath, that can help alleviate some stress. And we'll bring this brief arriving exercise to a conclusion now. So if your eyes have been closed, gently opening them. Thank you for doing that exercise with me. If you'd like maybe doing a stretch or something else, maybe standing up. But thank you for joining me in that exercise. I want to go over what we're going to address today. I do want to talk about the topic at hand, mindfulness at work, and the role that mindfulness plays in reducing stress and enhancing resiliency. I also want to give us an opportunity to practice mindful meditation. We just had a little dosage of it a moment ago. I thought that was important since so many of us are coming here probably experiencing the stress of these challenging times. So we'll have another exercise in a bit. And then I want to share some everyday mindfulness practices for not only working mindfully at work in everyday experiences, but also perhaps a few more tips today about working with uncertainty, fear, and difficulty at work and at home. So that's what we're going to cover today. And I thought I'd start with a general topic of workplace stress and things that we know, and then move that a little more focused into current stresses. So today's workplace climate, sometimes I call these the Downer Debbie slides. But today's workplace climate, we know that stress, there's a lot of research, Towers and Watson regularly does studies on this, and they say that stress is the #1 workforce risk issue, ranking higher than physical inactivity and obesity and other factors as well. And sources of stress, some of these may seem familiar to you. I'm going to call it regular, standard, everyday workplace stressors that we experience. Is this lack of work-life balance, and many different studies highlight these: workload and inadequate staffing, technologies, expanding employee availability, this 24/7 connectivity that we have now, and expectations and a lack of understanding around boundaries where we begin and end with work. And then relationships and team dynamics, conflicts that may ensue, and how do we mindfully communicate with each other in the workplace, particularly under stressful times. And then change, that's pace, it seems continual for many of us, and the amount of change. So these are what I'm going to call everyday facts and figures and research and data that we know about stress in the workplace. And there's also the role that we bring to our everyday lives that we may not think about, that actually cause a great deal of stress in our lives. And distraction seems to be a norm. And multitasking, many of you may be familiar with this, really takes a toll on our ability to pay attention, to be mindful and in the present moment. And we notice these reductions in productivity, taking longer to take a task. Many say that it can take up to 20 minutes if you have been working on a project and suddenly you want to go check your Facebook feed and then you come back. That loss in productivity, that ability to re-engage our concentration and focus takes some time. And we also see more errors as well. And then this chronic partial attention. I think we live in a state of what I'm going to call chronic partial attention. You can probably relate to that. Being at your desk, I'm sure none of you have ever done this before, but notice that people have been on a conference call and they're clearing out their emails simultaneously, or you're talking to somebody and also responding to a text. We've gotten so used to this partial inattention and intentionality that we have in our communications, and our ability to be mindful is impeded by that. Again, this living in this hyper complex 24/7 connected world that we live in right now, and it is an unprecedented rate of change. Average person will spend 5 years and 4 months of their life on social media. Isn't that amazing? I was at a conference recently, and someone told me that. And Americans check their cell phones, talk about distractions, 80 to 150 times a day. The data tells us that the younger you are, the more likely you are to be on that high end. However, I have to say I've done some experiments with myself and have just been absolutely surprised by how many times I've done that. And again, every time I do that, there's nothing wrong with technology. It's us users. And there's nothing wrong with checking our cell phones, particularly in periods like this. We're going to be doing that more frequently because we want to stay connected with people. But let's remember, what is our intention? And what are we doing with our ability to remain at ease and be more attentive in our lives when we are allowing our technology to control us rather than our more compassionately working with technology? And then we know, of course, that a key leadership skill, particularly when we talk about emotional intelligence or almost any of the leadership models and theories, tell us that this ability to manage our stress and to pay attention and to have focus when it matters really allows us to lead a life with more purpose, to be more effective as leaders, and is a really key component. Now, I promised you that I would talk a little bit about the current virus, the coronavirus, and the stress that we're experiencing now, both at work and at home. And I've taken some of my information here from a gentleman named Peter Sandman. And on the next slide, you'll see a link to his website. And perhaps we can send that link out to you after this communication as well, after this webinar. But he talks about something as adjustment reactions. And these are reactions that we all have when unpredictable things happen in our lives, and that it's very natural and normal to go through a stressful period of what he calls, again, adjustment reactions. Psychiatrists also use this term. Here are some things for us to consider, and we're probably experiencing these again, both at work and at home. The first is that it's automatic. Our central nervous system is just trying to reach some homeostasis to figure out how to deal with this situation and how to respond. Some may think it's we're taking knee-jerk reactions right now, and people tend to be overreactive or hyper-vigilant. One of the things we can do is perhaps offer ourselves and others a little bit of patience and kindness now, knowing that our central nervous systems are actually just trying to respond and to reach a sense of balance in these difficult times. So if you're feeling a bit more reactive than you normally might, welcome to the human condition. We're all probably experiencing this to a certain degree as we go through this adjustment. It comes early. Right now, when you first heard about this, and when right now in Minnesota, I would say we're kind of in the heart of this right now, we may notice that it seems a little strong right now. But this actually has a benefit to the central nervous system, believe it or not, because it helps us actually increase our ability to deal with risk and situations we might face later on. So it's kind of preparing us, priming us, if you will. And I think it's really important for all of us. I know I've found this really important to remind myself that this is temporary. And most people will not have long-term consequences to the stress that we're experiencing right now. That we can learn how to work with this. Now that we're beginning to identify it and experience it, we can learn how to work with it and to care for ourselves so that it doesn't have long-term impacts. And most of the time, again, the research tells us that it doesn't. It may seem disproportionate or excessive, some of our response, and I think it's really important, again, to provide some context for this. And to notice what happens with our minds in rumination. I call it falling into what if world, right? We're leaning way into the future, which can produce some anxiety, our minds, our thoughts. One of the gifts of working with mindfulness, many of you may know, is that it allows us to be more self-aware of what we're thinking without having to judge it. And when we notice that we're stuck in rumination or anxiety about the future, we can come back to the body. The body is a fabulous present moment anchor to help us calm that central nervous system just a little bit. That little exercise that we did when we started here, we were increasing our field of awareness by looking around the room a little bit, broadening our perspective. Simple things like that. Feeling our feet on the ground, having a glass of water, taking those deep breaths can really help bring us back to the here and now. And notice when we're going through that period of a disproportionate or what we might label as excessive, but just knowing, giving that some context and some kindness. We may need additional guidance and knowledge. Those of you who may be in positions where you're communicating to people about some of the difficulty that's happening now, remembering that we need to recommunicate and communicate again and again in a way to be helpful to people, because we're all at different levels and places in terms of hearing information that comes. So getting that information from credible sources can be really helpful. Also, mindfully paying attention to the amount of time you're spending on media and where you're getting your information as well can be really helpful with that guidance and knowledge. And believe it or not, the psychiatrists and social scientists tell us that these adjustment reactions that many of us are experiencing right now may actually be nature's way of helping us to be better prepared in the short and long term. So stress does have a role in our body to alert us, to notice what's happening so that we can pay attention. And so when we look at our stress response, perhaps more mindfully or compassionately in some of these ways, it may help us. So I'd like to spend a moment here with you, just having you think about in your own life. And maybe you're experiencing resilience right now. But I'd like you to think back maybe at other times that have been difficult in your life when you've experienced well-being and resilience. And by the way, let's describe resilience as this ability to be in the midst of difficult times, but come home to a sense of resourcefulness within ourselves, maybe bounce back a little bit easier and better. So when have you experienced it? And maybe what was present that permitted you? Let's ask that question. What was present that allowed you to experience that resiliency in your life? What were the elements? What was there? And if you would please just jot down, send in chat those comments, and Molly will tell me what you've said. We'll just share a couple of those. So just take a minute to reflect, write some of your own comments. When have you experienced it and what was present? You'll want to make some brief comments, but we'd love to hear. Because when we can remember these things, it can really help us right now in these times. Oh yes, I've been through difficult times before, but I've gotten through those, and here's what's helped.
So Marianne, some comments are coming in, and there's more than we could ever share during our time.
Thank you, everybody.
Yes. But so some common themes that are coming up is support, whether that be from, family and friends or the leadership team at your office. Being in nature is another comment that I'm seeing quite a bit. Moving your body, and whether that's, hiking or dancing or exercising. Those are some things that I see in the comments.
Great. Those are wonderful. Thank you, everyone. So I think maybe it could be helpful for all of us to consider those things you wrote down or that you reflected on, maybe that you heard Molly say, other things that weren't said, as touchstones, things for us to remember throughout our days, to come home to that, oh yes, I do have this ability to be resilient. And I do know how to enhance well-being in my own life and perhaps in the lives of others that surround me as well. And just remembering those and coming home to them periodically. So thank you for those comments. And I'm sorry we can't get to all of them, but we'll have more sharing as we go along here. So let's now talk about mindfulness. We know through over 30 years of research now that mindfulness, the practice of mindfulness, has the ability to reduce our stress and enhance our well-being. I like to refer to it as an evidence-based practice because there is over 30 years of research now that's demonstrated again to reduce our stress. You see in the upper right-hand corner there, the center's well-being model. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that when we conclude, as a terrific resource for you that's online for these times right now to get some more information of ways to help enhance your resiliency and well-being in addition to mindfulness. So because mindfulness almost seems ubiquitous these days, everybody talks about it, I think it's really important that we ground ourselves in what the center, a definition that the center likes to use for mindfulness. And it's an awareness of one's present moment experience with a sense of curiosity. I'd sometimes like to say a gentle allowing of noticing what's ever present here and now with a non-judgmental attitude. I'm going to break that definition down just a bit before we go any further. When we talk about present moment, well, that sounds pretty simple. Aren't most of us experiencing present moment? Well, there have been a number of studies that look at, in any moment in time where our minds are, what we're thinking, and the far majority of the time, most of us aren't in a present moment awareness experience. We tend to either be leaning into the future and pre-living our future, which can lead to some of that rumination and anxiety that I talked about earlier. But then there's obviously nothing wrong with planning and leading into the future. But when it turns into rumination, we begin to see real impacts on our stress and well-being. The other thing that we may be doing if we're not pre-living our future is that we may be reliving our past, right? And there's rumination that could be associated with that as well. So this ability to focus our attention here and now is also challenged by 24/7 connectivity and some of the other things we talked about earlier. We live in this world that kind of almost supports partial attention. It's almost counterculture, some will say, to be mindful and present. So it takes some training. The good news is that mindfulness is an innate ability that we all have. But most of us need to build that muscle of mindfulness. And just like physical exercise, we want to get stronger. We go to the gym and we work out, and that builds our muscle tone and our cardiovascular ability. The same could be said with the practice of mindfulness. We're building the muscle of our mind, our ability to focus, to come to the present moment. And research tells us it also has a calming effect, not only on the body, but our emotional well-being as well. I also want to mention this non-judgmental attitude. Neuroscientists, some of you may be familiar with this, say that the primary function of our brain is to ensure that we survive, that this body and mind of ours survives. And so we have a negativity bias. The brain has a negativity bias. It's constantly scanning the environment for what might be missing, what's not working, always on alert that way. So it can be really easy for us, and I want us all to hear this and to offer ourselves some compassion during particularly challenging times, to notice that we might be hypervigilant, that instinct to be aware of threats and constantly be scanning the environment might be a little bit higher right now. We're hardwired that way. You wouldn't be listening to this and I wouldn't be speaking right now if our ancestors hadn't been wired to respond to life that way. So, but there is an antidote to, there are many antidotes actually, but the antidote that I want to talk today about with this non-judgmental attitude and working with it more constructively is this practice of mindfulness, where we can broaden our perspectives to begin to see the goodness in our lives as well. Moments of gratitude. Even now in these challenging and difficult times, there's much goodness in our lives. And perhaps one of the gifts of mindfulness is to be able to see the goodness in our lives. I also want to suggest to you in this period of time that mindfulness is also what I like to call other-oriented. Some people think that mindfulness is just a individual process that we do, but it has a powerful ripple effect in our lives. It involves, as well as an inner awareness of our own well-being and what's happening in any particular moment, but it also involves a broader social and environmental awareness. And when we're mindful, we're able to see and respond to others in our lives with greater sensitivity and understanding. As a matter of fact, I've been saying that I think this notion of social distancing, which we're all being asked to do, is actually in many respects a mindful act of caring and generosity that we're extending towards others. So something for us to think about. Mindful social distancing, I guess we could call it. Here's some research on mindfulness. We know, again, that the neuroplasticity of the mind, that with this regular practice of mindfulness, we can change our brains. The research tells us, and some of this is done through fMRI scans, that we see a reduced activity in the electrical circuitry in the amygdala, the part of the brain, the more primitive part of the brain that really gets activated when we're in the fight, flight, or the stress response. And when that happens, we can get amygdala hijack, shutting down the prefrontal cortex, the fuzzy brain that some of us experience, or not being able to recall those words, or just having more difficult time with planning and thinking things through a bit more strategically. So we know that through the practice of meditation, again, and the practice of mindfulness and everyday activities as well, we can impact the reactivity of the amygdala and increase the functioning of our prefrontal cortex. And this gets a little nerdy, but here you've got some mindfulness at work, some research on the functional domains and how that can really enhance our attention, our cognition, our self-regulatory behaviors, and our physiology as well, including aging. There's some interesting research on that. And emotions. Noticing that we can let things go a little bit easier. We learn that emotions are energy that can run through us, and that we can choose to respond rather than react to a number of the difficult situations in our lives. And overall, mindfulness at work has been shown to enhance performance, relationships, and well-being, not just of individuals, but of teams and organizations as well. And when we talk about mindfulness, there's a 3-step process to it, I like to say. Most practices of meditation will give you a focal point. The mind likes to wander. That's what the mind likes to do. So we give it something to pay attention to. And the breath and the body are always in the present moment. How cool is that? So we can always use the breath and the moment as an anchor, as something to pay attention to. And then, and I'm going to lead you through a meditation in a moment where we'll experience this, inevitably your mind will wander, because that's what the mind likes to do. And when we notice that we've lost focus in a meditation, we wake up to that. And there's no need to judge ourselves harshly for that. It happens to all of us, the wandering mind. But we pay attention to that, and we choose in that moment to escort our attention back to our breath or body, whatever we're paying attention to. We gain focus and we begin again. I think another term for mindfulness meditation may be this opportunity to begin fresh and new again in every moment, whether we're practicing a formal meditation or we're just in our everyday activities, whether at work or at home. So let's take a moment here, just for a couple minutes now, to do a meditation together. So let's settle in to a comfortable posture. Both feet on the floor can be really helpful. Maybe just rolling up, back, and down the shoulders, allowing the hands to just be wherever they're most comfortable. And again, choosing, if you'd like, to gently close your eyes, or if that doesn't feel right for you, just a soft fixed gaze in front of you can be helpful. Looking around the room tends to busy the mind. So all we're doing is just trying to quiet the mind a bit in the visual field. All right? So now let's just take in a couple of those deep, full, and satisfying breaths again. The breath can be really helpful to us in terms of regulating ourselves and reducing stress. So let's take in a couple of deep in-breaths and longer out-breaths, really releasing that out-breath as we begin here. Allowing the body to just settle in to being here now. Just setting to the side everything that's already been today and what's yet to come. And giving yourself this gift of just a couple of minutes now to really be present to yourself. Once again, feeling the feet on the floor, the weight of the body being supported and held by the chair you're sitting in. Maybe noticing a sense of warmth or coolness in the body now. Letting go of those deeper, fuller breaths if you haven't already. And just allowing the natural rhythmic breath to just resume. Remembering that this body knows just how to breathe. So there's no need now to control it or to manipulate it in any way. We're just sitting in stillness together now. The body breathing, a community of breathers. All of us together now in this moment. And maybe taking a moment to invite a sense of ease in the body as we did earlier. Moving from the top of the head all the way down to the bottoms of the feet. Maybe moving the toes around a little bit, just to acknowledge the feet, their placement on the floor, that sense of groundedness. And then when you're ready, let's turn our attention to one of two objects, and please choose which feels most appropriate for you in this moment. Either just noticing the natural rhythmic quality of the breath in your body and simply following each in-breath from beginning to end, as with a kind observing quality. And when your mind wanders, just come back, noticing if it's an in-breath or an out-breath. Or if you'd prefer, just opening up your field of awareness to include sensations in the body as a whole right now. Or perhaps choosing sounds, just opening up to receiving sounds in the environment. So whatever the object of your awareness that you're choosing, breath, the body as a whole, or sound, just sitting in silence now with some kindness and care. And when the mind wanders, remember, just bring it back to just this moment in your object of awareness. And now, when you're ready, allowing the object of your awareness, whatever it was, to that focused attention, to just recede a bit into the background. And just noticing now, taking a moment as an internal check-in, noticing the overall quality and condition now of the body, mind, and spirit, the heart, as we bring this meditation to a conclusion. And maybe also offering yourself a sense of appreciation for taking this time to not only be with yourself, but also with this community now, offering support. And so when you're ready, taking in a deeper, fuller in-breath and an out-breath. And we'll bring this to a conclusion. So opening your eyes if they've been closed, maybe looking around the room again and just becoming familiar with your environment, or a little stretch. Thank you very much for joining me on that meditation. It might be nice just to get a word or a phrase for what your experience was with that meditation, what you noticed.
So the responses that I'm getting are peaceful, stillness, calm, relaxing, rejuvenating, a sense of lightness, restored. So a lot of really positive responses.
Now, thank you, Molly, very much. And thank you for all of you who responded. I also want to suggest that for some of you that may not have been so relaxing, because maybe when you began to really come home and orient yourself internally, you noticed that there was a great deal of stress or some anxious thoughts or things like that. Mindfulness, that's very normal and natural. If those were occurrences, or maybe you noticed a little bit more pain in the shoulder than you thought you had, because mindfulness is about increasing our awareness of what's ever present. So the powerful gift, at least for me throughout my life, and I think many others as well, with the practice of mindfulness, is it allows us to see what's here so that then we can respond and make choices in our lives rather than perhaps be so reactive. There's a quote by Viktor Frankl that you may have seen before. It's one of my favorites. This is actually an adaptation of a little longer quote. But freedom is the ability to pause between stimulus and response, and in the pause to choose. I sometimes will take out the word freedom and add mindfulness, because mindfulness gives us a pause as we practice formally and also throughout our days, when we notice our reactivity and we choose in that moment instead to feel our feet on the ground, take a deep breath, and remember that, oh, I can begin this next moment fresh and new again. So in mindfulness, in the way that we teach mindfulness here at the center, which we've been doing now for over 30 years, I might add, we talk about mindfulness as having a formal practice, somewhat like the meditation that we just did. That would be considered a formal mindfulness, a meditation practice. But there are many informal practices that we can do throughout our day. I know a teacher that says many moments, many times. When we notice that we're distracted or whatever's going on, that we're leaning into the future or past, and bring ourselves to right here and now, maybe by noticing something novel in our environment, or whatever it may be, to bring our attention back, that those build states of mindfulness and eventually traits of mindfulness as well. I worked with a colleague, Janice Monterino, for a number of years, and she always used to talk about taking purposeful pauses throughout our day at work. A really key, she used to say, leadership skill. And I've got a big list here, but I want you to see a variety of things that we can do to enhance our everyday mindfulness. Walking down the hall, standing. I was on a call this morning where one of the people on the meeting said, I'm standing all the time now. It's kind of like mindful standing at my desk while she's working remotely. Before you answer phones, eating meals, washing dishes, or reading to a child. You see a big list there. Maybe before waking up and prior to falling asleep, taking a couple deep breaths, reflecting on what you might be grateful that happened that day. Hard for us sometimes to acknowledge, but can be really helpful when we're going through difficult times, or when waking up in the morning, remembering your intention for the day. Here's something that you'll see that we talk about quite a bit in mindfulness as a good informal practice, and it's easy to remember. Stop. when we want to just come home to the present moment. Slow down a little bit. Maybe I'm getting a little racy or reactive here. Again, using that breath to help calm our central nervous system. And then observing what's happening, noticing. Much of compassion is about, mindfulness is about simply noticing. And noticing that with some compassion, noticing that judgmental attitude that can sometimes kick in, the negativity bias, and offering yourself some self-compassion instead. And then proceeding from there with some new possibilities and maybe broader perspectives. So I talked a little bit earlier about the work of adjustment reactions in the work of Peter Sandman. I want to leave you with 5 other tips that I think can be particularly helpful. Just a summary of 5 here when we're dealing with difficult times and fear in our lives. The first, much of what we've already been talking about, is to calm and befriend our central nervous system. Name and normalize your feelings can also be a very, very helpful tool. And being mindful of the factors of resilience, taking good care of yourself, what you eat, sleep, all those things, exercise, having a sense of purpose and meaning, reaching out to others more frequently. I think that's being said everywhere, being creative with it, with things like Zoom and Skype, and doing whatever you can to help broaden your perspectives, maybe seeing beauty in your life, remembering things that you're grateful for, offering yourself and others a little bit more patience or compassion. I'm going to conclude this with a quote by Viktor Frankl, and then I'm going to turn this over to Molly as well. Molly?
Thanks, Marianne. We're getting pretty close to time here, but I do want to just take a moment to ask a couple of questions that came in from participants.
Great.
And one of the questions was about how to be mindful and balance stress when perhaps you are working from home, but you have a partner or kids home from school that are also kind of vying for your attention, and it's hard not to get distracted.
Yes, thanks for asking that. Many people that I've talked to have talked about how difficult it is to readjust and that it's really disorienting right now working at home. There are a number of tips that I have seen different places, and many of them talk about establishing a new routine. I'm working at home in my home office now too. And one of the things that I've had to do is to develop a new routine for myself and then kind of stick to that routine. When you've got partners or children in the house, sometimes even your pets, it can also be really helpful to establish some new boundaries and have family meetings, if you will, about how are we going to do this all together, being kind and patient with one another and really coming up with a strategy that works for you. I don't think one size fits all here, but I think having a nice conversation about that can be really helpful. I also think as a family, if you're in your home, watching the amount of time that you're spending with the news and social media, and maybe giving and carving out some time, whether you live alone or you live with other people, to connect in more meaningful ways with others and seek out support and have conversations with how you're doing now.
Great, and we'll take one more question for those that can stay just a minute or two over. So one of the participants shared that the idea of relaxing or kind of carving out time for mindfulness right now feels like one more thing on their to-do list in an already very busy and uncertain time. Do you have any tips about how they could potentially sort of shift their mindset around that?
First off, I love that question. Thank you for asking it. Mindfulness can be brought to any moment and anything that you're doing throughout the day. So for instance, I'm going to pick up my mug here. When I have my morning coffee in the morning, what would it be like? I'm drinking the coffee anyway, or my cup of tea or a cup of water. What would it be like if I chose to do that mindfully, noticing the feel of the mug and maybe the warmth, and taking a moment to really savor and appreciate the flavors in the beverage when you're eating a meal, maybe right before you go on a conference call or a Zoom meeting. Take a moment just to take a breath and remember your intentionality as you enter into that meeting. When you're walking up and down the stairs or hallway at home, maybe choosing to take some mindful steps, noticing where your mind is wandering, and instead very kindly just softening into the body, feeling the feet on the floor. Anything that you are doing, including exercising, cooking, we can bring a mindful present moment awareness to with some kindness and gentleness.
Great. Well, thank you, Marianne, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. We'll be sending out a follow-up email that will have several resources on mindfulness at work and beyond. We'll also be sharing some other free opportunities to practice mindfulness and well-being tools, so watch out for that. We hope you enjoyed today's webinar, and we hope you are able to apply some of these tips during a really challenging time.
Thanks, everybody. Take note of the link on the bottom of the page there, Taking Charge. I think Molly's going to send that out in the email too. We've got lots of resources online for you. So thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.